Some time ago, Blizzard made a survey asking the community what they would like to see in a future Classic Plus. But in this survey, Blizzard asked the most out-of-touch questions. Questions like, would you want flying mounts in Classic Vanilla? And this got some people really fired up. So the community took matters into their own hands, and in response, they made a real Classic Plus survey. Shout out to the guys at Countdown to Classic. So in today's video, I'll be going over the results of this survey while I give you guys my take on the questions asked. So let's dive into it and take a look at what the community actually want to see in a future Classic Plus. Alright guys, welcome back to part 3 of our Classic Plus community survey deep dive. This is the final part of this video series where we explore what thousands of players want from a potential Classic Plus version of World of Warcraft. So without any further ado, let's just dive right back into it. Should guild banks be added to Classic Plus? And again, a vast majority, 80% votes yes, only 4% votes no, and 15% are neutral, and I'm on the majority here. I think yes. I think every guild has a guild bank already, but it works in a different way. It works so that the game masters or the officers of the guild, they make alts, and those alts are the ones who have the items. So it's already being done, but just in a bad way. So adding guild banks is just an overall win. I think of course this should be added. That's a no-brainer in my opinion. How should you search for a guild to join? Majority says browse an interface with guild advertisements published. Yeah, that's a sound option. And then we have 33% who say read advertisements in-game text channels. So just like they are right now, mainly, but maybe with a dedicated world channel. And then 17 or 18% say I use Warcraft logs / Discord to find guilds. And not everyone has know about that or want to do it that way, but so I think I again agree with the majority here. An interface, just like looking for a group interface, we had the add-on with the bulletin board, and in anniversary they added a real good option to find dungeon groups, and I think they could add the same for guild advertisements. It's quite easy. So yeah. Would guild halls be an exciting addition to Classic Plus? Instance entry like the PvP halls, customizable internal area, Valheim / WoW vibes, display trophies, hire NPC staff to fulfill profession roles, possibly unlock features like alchemy table for flash creation, etc. Guild bank within. And the majority say yes, but not a huge priority for me. And then 31% say yes, absolutely, and 27.3% say no. I say yes. Again, I kind of agree with the majority here, but it's not a huge priority for me. And I also need to add, I think we should be careful this doesn't become a garrison thing, because once you can say create flasks and have a flask table, then the need to go to a dungeon to do this kind of disappears. And what disappears with that is world relevancy. So now again, you bump into the problem with the world dying because, I can just go to my guild house to do these tasks. And there's a charm with keeping the world alive instead of being in instant zones all the time. And making sure that there's a reason to go out into the world is very, very important for vanilla to feel like it's a game that's alive. So I do think yes, but I don't necessarily think that it should unlock table for flasks or etc. You should be very, very careful, at least if you do something like this. Pre-raid endgame. Would a currency reward from completing dungeons used to purchase materials and items be a benefit to Classic Plus? And I think what they did in Season of Discovery with this one was a good change. I think I agree here with the majority that these, I can't remember what they're called, coins, badges, whatever. There should be some, so even if you don't get any item from going into a dungeon, you're still gradually working towards getting that item, just in a different way. So say, okay, yay, my item dropped, but now I can still use this currency towards one of the other items on my bucket list of items I need to get. But make sure that it's not too rewarding to do. It should be rewarding, and it should keep dungeons relevant for longer. So when I have the best gear, that I can buy some materials for participating in dungeon runs. And I think that's a really good idea, actually. Because in endgame vanilla, it is really, really hard to find people to run your Scholarmans or to run your upper Blackrock Spire or lower Blackrock Spire or like any dungeon you could basically think of. So to keep dungeons more relevant, something like that is a great idea in my opinion. Anything that gives you options when it comes to getting gear, getting gold, and improving your professions, I am all in for. The more options, the merrier, but make sure that the between options are equal, right? There shouldn't, again, be one best way to do anything. Like incursions, there shouldn't exist something that's so powerful that it checks off all the boxes and is the best way to do everything. Because that's how you destroy the game. You need to be very, very meticulous in the way that you make sure that, running dungeons isn't the de facto best way to earn gold, or best way to get your gear, or best way to increase your professions, or anything. There should be options upon options. Same for PvP. I think world PvP should also be a way of getting your rank up, and it shouldn't be that Alterac Valley is the best way of getting honor. It should be equal. So you have many options and not one de facto way of doing things, right? That's my answer. Now into the most important, PvP. How would you change PvP? How would you change the PvP system in Classic Plus? Interesting. Let's start here. Nothing. Classic rank 14 system is great. Only gets 7.5% of votes. Rank 14 grind, but without any decay, like in Era, Sword, and also Anniversary. And that one gets 29%. And that's the majority. Majority would like the same system, but without the decay. And second to that, by 21.6%, we have rank 14. Oh, these three are very close. Rank 14, grind, but all progress counts to an honor point. What does it say? An honor points total, no weekly thresholds. Interesting. The biggest problem with the vanilla ranking system is it's very, very unintuitive and difficult to understand. You need to have honor spy or some other add-on to understand, okay, where am I in terms of honor compared to the rest, and how you're basically gaming the system in a way. But you also don't want to just keep grinding honor if you know, okay, to this point, like say I have 50,000 honor, so now I can't gain any more rank. So every additional honor point is just redundant. That's how the vanilla system is right now. You can't just go straight from rank 1 to rank 14. There are there are thresholds in place, but you don't see those. You need to have a third-party add-on to see those thresholds. So those thresholds should maybe just be visible in the vanilla UI if they intend to keep it that way. So yeah, next one is rank 14 grind, no decay, can redo the grind for cosmetic rewards like mounts, titles, tab arts, prestige styles. So basically they're saying pretty much the same as the other option here, but you're now also able to, once you reach your rank 14, then you can do it again, and then you can earn a mount or a tab art or title or some other cosmetic item. And then the last one, a rework entirely from the rank 14 structure akin to Wrath of the Lich King onwards. 20% votes to that one. And my opinion is that I don't know. I don't really feel like I have an answer to this one. The only thing that I know for sure is that I hate resilience or other PvP specific stats, but I wouldn't mind any of from here and down, right? From this one, the majority votes 29% here on rank 14 grind without the DK. I think the DK is bad. And everything here I'm okay with. What's good about the vanilla system is that you really have to put some effort into getting your rank. So there's really some prestige to running around with your High Warlord or Grand Marshal gear, right? Because you know, okay, that guy, he really put in the hours. But another great thing about the TPC/Lich King way of structuring PvP with honor points is that, let's say you just need a bracer. You got everything else from your raids and your dungeons, but you couldn't get that bracer, so you would like to get the bracer from PvP. So you go farm some honor, and now you can afford your bracers. So it's going to be a lot easier to mix and match different gear to complete your character. And when we're talking about options, I'm all for options. I want to make sure that, you know, people who are, you can mix and match all types of gear in vanilla already. Nobody's going to say that, oh, you can't do PvP with your PvE gear, or you can't do PvE with your PvP gear. You can do both, and that's so great because it leaves out so many options. Once you introduce PvE or PvP specific stats, then you separate the community. Now you need two different sets of gear. Now you need your PvE gear and your PvP gear because they're not crossing over, and that's just a bad system. I think they fixed that in, was it Legion, where the resilience stat or something was just already on your character or something. Anyway, I think not a template, right? That's not the fix, but just making sure that you don't one-shot each other in PvP, but also making sure that you have many options when it comes to gearing, because that's what went wrong in TPC. The introduction of resilience made it so that either you were a PvEer or you were a PvPer. It was very difficult to do both, and if you wanted to do both, then you would have to equip two different sets of gear. But that's that's beyond the question here. Moving on, would you add Arena PvP to Classic Plus? And majority answers yes, as an alternative to BGs to earn honor. And next up, we have yes, in its full TPC Plus state, Arena rating, separate gear, etc. And then 28%, very close to the previous year, the 29, say no. So I'm all for Arena, but I don't think the reward should be different, because then again, you're kind of removing options. Because if you say, okay, there's different separate gear, etc., how do you balance that between those two? I think it's going to be difficult, and I think you would want maybe at least if they do it like that, the arena gear shouldn't be better than the BG gear, because then you're just forcing people to do arena if they want to do PvP. Again, have options. So there should just be one, PvP currency, and that should be given to you no matter what type of PvP you want to participate in. If you want to do world PvP, then that should give honor points. If you want to do battlegrounds, that should give honor points. If you want to do arena, that should give you honor points. And maybe some of them should have a different currency that's cosmetic, say a title for a specific rating or a mount or something. Same for doing a lot of battlegrounds, same for doing a lot of world PvP. Maybe have a title for that, or a tabard for killing this many people in world PvP at your own level. Stuff like that should be could be the additions. So I agree with the majority on this one. Yes, as an alternative to BGs to earn honor, be it honor points or be it a rank that you get for getting enough honor. Doesn't really matter that much to me, so long as there's balance between the options and you're just giving players freedom to choose whichever modality of PvP they prefer, and it should be somewhat equally rewarding. Next up, should there be PvP stats for PvP? Oh, and I'm so happy to see that the majority agrees with me on this one, because 70% votes no, additional stamina is enough. Yes, everyone understands that in TPC, what fucked it up mostly was the introduction of resilience. It separated the PvE and the PvP community, and that was just really, really bad for the game. And we already went over why. And then a minority say, yes, add resilience to ranking. Yeah, no, don't do that. Please don't do that. That's a horrible idea. I think Blizzard realized this in retail, because I don't think they have PvP specific stats on PvP gear anymore. At least there was some expansion where they got rid of it. I think it was Legion, but I can't really remember. So I don't know if they still have. I haven't played this since Shadowlands, I think, and I'm not going to. So likely not, at least. Maybe I am. Who knows? Never say never, but the current way they're running retail, I'm not interested. Okay, next up, if you had to choose, would you prefer more instance battlegrounds, plenty of modern/retail examples, or world PvP objectives, events, Season of Discovery, Ashen Vale, STV, BRM, Eastern Plaguelands, etc.? It's kind of a bad example with Season of Discovery, because I think honestly, Season of Discovery's PvP events was dog shit. They were just so bad. They were such good ideas. I think Ashen Veil was such a good idea. STV was such a good idea. Those were great ideas. But the execution on those ideas were so fucking bad. I didn't play much of I did play some, but it was kind of bad as well in Blackrock Mountain. And I haven't played since, I don't know which phase it was, when Blackwing Lair came out. That's why I stopped playing Season of Discovery. But if they've executed correctly on the Ashen Veil event and made it into an actual PvP event, then that would have been great, I think. Maybe let it happen less often and make it a little bit less rewarding, because it was, again, completely overtuned and was more or less something you had to do. Same with the STV event. It was kind of a clusterfuck, and I think they should have removed the ability for you to turn in your hits or whatever it was you collected when you killed somebody until the end of the event. So instead of people gathering around these turn-in points and just killing everything and just AoEing everything just to get more points and gaming the system, it should be something where you want to survive like a battle royale. You collect this many hits, and if you now get killed, you lose over half. So yeah, basically just imagine you lose. You'd want to stay alive if you couldn't just turn in the coins anytime during the event. So you had to collect as many coins. If you die, you lose half the coins. So there's a big incentive to not just run in and get killed like everyone else. Rather, you'd try to hide, maybe, try to avoid like ganking people, but avoiding getting ganked. So there's a lot more at stake if they implemented that fix to the STV event. That would have been a much better STV event. Moving on to, should crowd control in PvP be tweaked? 22% says yes, implement shorter CC durations. And 47% says yes, shorter CC and overlapping diminishing returns. And 30% says no, long CC duration is fine. I definitely do agree with the majority that, or maybe not the majority, I'm not sure what they mean by overlapping diminishing returns, but shorter CC durations, especially something like Sheep or Sap, where you can end up sitting there for like 20, 30 seconds even sometimes. Those could be reduced. I definitely agree that there's no need for you to sit in a Sap or in a Sheep like forever. That's a bit excessive, the durations and many of the vanilla CC durations. But that's pretty much it. I don't think I'd change every single one. But the longest ones I'd do a little bit shorter. And we move on to dishonorable kills. So 36% say remain as they are in Classic, assuming the system is the same. And the majority at 63.8% says make relevant dishonorable kill targets immune. Make relevant dishonorable kill targets immune to enable world PvP in hostile areas. Yeah, I'm not... in my opinion, I just dislike the dishonorable kill system. I think it was... I think it can be... unintuitive and overly punishing, and it kind of makes it so that you won't want to be in a group with other people you're not completely sure wouldn't attack a NPC who potentially is a desirable kill target. So for those reasons, I'd say just get rid of it. The only where I think what was the intention behind this was probably you wouldn't want to gank low-level characters out in the world, but it doesn't really work like that. So in my opinion, just make them immune and not be able to kill every single NPC in a town. And also, I think to add to this, make it so you can't just engage in world PvP against people who are, I'd say, 4 level or 5 levels below you. Because as a 60 running around ganking people at level 30, that's just stupid. Like, what? Nobody gains anything from that. So just make it so you can only kill in PvP within a level difference. So that's my take. Would you like to see rest timers after multiple deaths redesigned? The majority says yes, and 27.9% say no. So what do they mean by this? I think maybe it's the once you die over and over again in world PvP, you can't just, like, at some point they add a 2-minute timer before you can rest, and I'm not really sure the reason why, because if you've already been ganked over and over, isn't that punishment enough? So I just want to make sure that people can't rest directly on you, but that should happen already on the first death. So say you and some other guy fight in Stranglethorn Vale. Now you die. You run back to your corpse. Let's say there is only, I don't know, 5 seconds for you to reach your corpse. from where you died. You spawn right at the graveyard. Should you be allowed right now to rest directly on top of the guy who won the fight against you? In my opinion, no. He should at least get maybe half a minute or maybe even a minute to get his health back, get ready to another fight, or run away if he needs to, so you don't just spawn on top of him. And the same for you. You should be allowed, if you resurrect, a 30-second no attack. You know, you can't kill, or you can't get killed for a few seconds until you can get away and heal up maybe. So you don't just camp people over and over. Think something like that would be a good idea. And I think they did that also in the STV event, because that really put everything that really put the problem on display. So they had to do something, and that was the solution. I think it's actually a good solution to just have everywhere in the game, maybe not to the same extent, but something similar to that. Okay, we're moving on to raiding and endgame plus. Should Classic Plus push beyond tier 3/next? And majority says 66% says yes, adding new raids with slightly better rewards to enable power creeps. Okay. And 30% says yes, but adding horizontal content, my player power remains capped out. And then a 3.8% say no, next is the pinnacle of raiding for Classic Plus. Of course, I think also they should keep adding raids. But I don't agree with the majority on this one. I do agree with the 30% who say yes, but adding horizontal content, my player power remains capped out. And maybe instead of changing too much with the talents or the base abilities of players, maybe this way, getting other gear equal in power level, just like AQ gear, but AQ opened up for Retribution Paladins and Elemental Shamans, so that they also had gear that made them viable. You could do the same if you added new raids, but just made sure that the new gear that dropped in these raids would make it so that the other not so viable specs became viable. So in that way, you make sure that you don't introduce more power creep while still adding new content and adding new relevant gear. So yeah, that's my take. If your character only made marginal power gains between raid tiers, would this decrease your likelihood to play? So again, majority says no, it wouldn't decrease the likelihood for them to play, almost 80%, and then 20 or 21% says yes. I think that the power gains should be marginal, because I think it's overall healthier for the game. So is it good that powerful items are scattered between raid tiers to keep previous content relevant? Yes, of course it is. Thunder Fury, Onslaught Girdle, Icaria, or say Head of Ragnarok, stuff like that. Yes, I agree with the majority. Only a few will say no, because that is what makes vanilla vanilla. That is why vanilla is different from retail, or that's one of the bigger reasons why it's so different from retail. Because in retail, you only play the newest raids of the newest patch. In vanilla, you play the old raids and the new raids, and everything stays somewhat relevant. It's impossible to make everything relevant, probably, but you want to make as many things relevant as possible. So you want some great items to drop on a rare drop from the first few raids to make sure that those raids are always being completed and are always going to be relevant, so that new players who just joined the game, just reached max level, they can still find groups to join those older raids. That's what makes vanilla so great. So of course. Next question, which raid size is best suited for Classic Plus? And 36.4% say complete flex raiding, 30 to 25 people. And next up is 20s and 10s. That's 24% who votes 20-mans and 10-mans raids. And then 22.8% votes that 40-mans and 20-mans are the way to go. And that's what we already have in Classic. So 22.8% wants that to be the same as it already is. And then 13.6% says 25-mans and 10-mans. So they don't want the 40-man raids. Those are a bit too much. And then we have only 3% who votes that 20-man only raids should be the go-to. But I like the big 40-man raids, to be honest. I know the majority here wants complete flex raiding, and I can definitely see the advantages of that. And I've never been a raid leader myself, but I understand that it can be very difficult to assemble 40 people on the correct time, ready for raid and buffed up, consumed, and all the stuff that goes into organizing that many people is quite hard. So I can see why people would like flex raiding for those reasons. Things are a little bit easier to get going with this option. If you could vote for a combination of flex raiding and the 20s and 40-man raids, I'd probably go for that. I'd say anything below 40 man could maybe be a flex raid. There's just something epic about going in 40 man, but I'm not overly opinionated on this one. So let's move on to the next one. Should Classic Plus lean into various modes of difficulty for raids? And here the majority, 35%, votes that we should all do the same raid, meaning there should only be one difficulty. And then 28.5% votes that normal/hard modes, cosmetic rewards only, mounts, effects, titles, etc. So if there is a hard mode or a mythic or hardcore mode, it should only reward cosmetic items, titles or mounts, stuff like that. And then we have 20.8% who votes normal/hard modes, more of the same loot in heroic. So it's the same loot, it just drops more of it, so it's easier to gear your raid if you do the raid on hard mode. And then 15.7% votes hard mode, but with better loot in the hard mode. So this one I definitely disagree with. That's what they have already in retail, and I'm not sure I would want to see this in vanilla. At least for me, it really depends on how much better is that loot. And I think it caters to more of a hardcore min-max culture, which I don't think is the best for vanilla. I think it kind of kills the fun of raiding. And I think everyone would be striving towards the hard modes because that's where the best gear drops. And the easy modes or the normal modes are just going to be just as they are in retail. It's going to be the sightseeing raids. Go in there, everyone is going through the raid, everyone can easily see the entire raid, and that just kind of kills the experience in a way, because you've already seen each boss. So what now? Okay, now you just do the same again, but in a harder difficulty. Game's gonna feel more grindy, it's gonna feel more like a carrot on a stick, constantly choring about. And I'm not sure that I'm a fan of that mentality or way of creating endgame content. I try to be careful on this one, because again, just like before, I'm not really very opinionated on stuff like this. If we end up getting mythics and hard modes, it's not a huge turn-off for me, at least not in theory. It might be in practice, you never know. But I do agree with the majority on this one. I would default to that we all do the same raid. And if there's a hard mode, maybe just have it be cosmetic rewards so that the player base won't feel forced to do the harder mode raids. Now, moving on to the next one. Which era of Classic has the best consumable environment, excluding professions and world buff meta on top? And this one seems kind of split, actually perfectly split. 39.7% votes that Classic many consumes, utility consumes, foods, oils, jujus, etc. And then the other half, or the other 39.7%, votes for Wrath of the Lich King style with just flasks, feasts, haste pots, and utility potions. And then we have a 20.6% who votes for the style of TBC, where you'd have flask, food, haste, scroll, and utility pots. And for me on this one, I like the charm of Classic. There are so many different things you can farm. There's so many different ways you can try to optimize your raid performance, and it just feels fun. It shouldn't feel necessary, and that's why I can see why you would want to limit it and why the other half votes that Wrath Lich King would be their go-to, because if you are in a hardcore guild, they might require you to farm specific jujus, oils, buffs, and just spend a ton of money on that, and that can be quite tedious and quite cumbersome for the system of Wrath Lich King, and maybe also to an extent TBC kind of limits that and makes it easier to understand. I think you have to have some deep knowledge of Classic to understand which of these consumables overlap with each other. Is not very intuitive, but again, that is also some of the charm of vanilla, that it's not only skill that's going to help you throughout your raiding and gearing and just overall playthrough of the game. It's also knowledge of the game, and this knowledge only comes with experience, which is some of the things that sets Classic or vanilla apart from the other expansions, where the depth is kind of limited. So for those reasons, I'll cast my vote on the classic version, the vanilla version. And then they ask, how do you predominantly enjoy endgame World of Warcraft? And the majority, by 45.7%, votes casually, clearing raids and chilling. We are all dad gamers by now. And that falls quite well in line with the majority voting for one difficulty raid. And in Season of Mastery, I think they tried with more difficult raids, but people just ended up not wanting to do them. I think it's okay if you have some very difficult raids, but you should also have raids that are very accessible. And as I've said before, I like the coin system that they did in Season of Discovery, at least to an extent. Shouldn't be too much catch-up gear, but it should be a way of catching up slightly. Maybe not tier gear, but at least dungeon gear with the coins that you get from killing each boss. So you have a somewhat of a guarantee of getting a specific item or just the last item you need if you get really unlucky on drops. So the sword system or badge system that they also introduced in TBC and REF, I think that's overall a good system. But again, I wouldn't want them to introduce too many different badges. Just one simple badge, increase the price if you increase the reward, or increase the amount of badges you need if you increase the quality of the reward. But back to this one, 27.7% votes just blasting raids and parsing. But there are actually quite a good amount of people who just love going balls deep into raids and min-maxing everything, looking at those damage meters and squeezing out every ounce of DPS they possibly can, speed clearing and all that shit, which can, to be fair, be fun. Especially speed clearing is actually quite nice because at least you don't need to spend 3 hours in a molten core raid. So sometimes joining actually a hardcore raid is the most time-saving thing you can do, which is sometimes what I think a lot of the classic community would like, to save time and not constantly wipe in raids. I've tried both. I've been in a casual guild and I've been in a parsing or speed clearing guild, and there's definitely a big difference in the amount of time you need to spend in a raid. Like once you've grinded your reputations, and like there's more preparation of course in a speed clearing guild, but once all that's done and you're ready, you have the gold and you have your character set up, then it's the fastest way of completing the content. So it's basically comes down to what kind of person are you. For me, I'm mostly a PvPer, so I am casual in a way, but I don't like to wipe in raids. I don't like to spend 3 hours. I'm not having that much fun in Molten Core or Blackwing Lair or Anchorage. So that's just my take. And let's see what the 12.6% of people votes PvP enthusiast. Well, that's actually mostly me. I am a PvP enthusiast. I do raid, but that's to get the gear for PvP. The end game that I enjoy mostly is PvP. I do think that people also casually enjoy PvP. I think there should probably have been a question that would combine PvP and casual clearing of raids and chilling. Because I think if you also had that option, I think that would have been the most upvoted. I think most of the casual raiders or just chilling around also just want to chill around with PvP, get some good gear, slap some noobs, or get slapped. Then we have 4% or 4.5% who wrote Mythic plus Dungeon King, another 4.1% speedrunning raids, and then another 4.1% who are non-raiding enjoyers, and a 1.3% who votes for retail raiding. Next question, would achievements be a good addition to Classic Plus? And 33.5%, aka the majority, votes yes. Raids, PvP, exploration, everything. And next up, 23.8% votes no. 21.8% votes yes, non-performance based achievements to prevent gatekeeping. And then 20.9% are neutral. I earn achievements by accident. And I am in the same camp. I'm pretty much neutral on this one. Since they introduced achievements in RAF Lich King, it wasn't something I would go out of my way to try and get. It's fine that it's there. I don't really care, but it's not something that interests me. I'm not a completionist in that sense. Now we move on to world buffs. How should world buffs exist in Classic Plus? The majority, 43.6% votes, I like them, but make them more convenient to gather / hold on to. 39.2% votes, remove them entirely. And then 17.1% votes exactly as they are in 1.12. Cooldowns, resets, locations, specific, etc. I think what they did with the Chronopoom Displacer was sorely needed just to prevent people from locking out, and maybe also add to that they are not dispellable, but of course if you die with them on, you lose them. And to add something to that, I'd say personally I would probably make them less strong. They are quite meta right now, and they are a huge difference. And instead of 5% crit, maybe 1% crit. So it's still a buff, but the biggest ones probably should be a little bit less strong. I want to keep them. I don't think they should be entirely removed, because this is also one of the reasons why people go out into the world. That's also one of the things that makes vanilla feel so alive, is in a way you are forced out into the world. You're forced to interact with the outworld and not just stay in the major cities and doing nothing. And this is also why there is such an active PvP community in vanilla. There's so much world PvP. There's something about the danger you feel when you're out in the world and trying to collect these buffs. Something about you and your team gathering up at Fellwood to go out. Maybe you're 5 people or 10 people, and you go out together to see if you can get one of these Songflower Serenades that give you stats and plus crit. So mostly stuff like that I really like. Farming your jujus, buying some consumes from an alchemist, gathering herbs, gathering Ripper Root tubers, and maybe they could even add more of this, like holding a base in Eastern Plaguelands to give you a 1% damage buff or something like that. So you also incentivize some PvP. Just make it easy for people to save the buffs, so they don't feel like they get overly punished if they lose the buff. It's easier to buy Chronoboom Displacer and just keep using them to gather up your buffs, and just make sure that the buffs aren't too overpowered. Then you could have more of them, and the world would feel really alive, because there's an incentive to gather some of them. And maybe you could have overlapping, let's say you don't want to find a Songflower Serenade in Fellwood. Then there could be another buff that does the exact same thing and doesn't stack with the Songflower Serenade. So you have a choice. Either you could go to Fellwood and see if you can find a flower, or you can go to Silithus and see if you can get a specific drop from a mob, or get a PvP kill, and then you gather something and get another buff that's similar. So we have different ways to gather the same buffs, and thereby making more of the world relevant. Those are just some ideas. But let's move on to this is the last one. Last question. If world buffs were to be made more convenient, what methods should be acceptable? And people have voted mostly for storing them with chronobooms. 72% votes on that one. And after that, we have a 50.8% of votes. Repeatable buff quests. Onyxia Head, Sulgrope Heart, etc. And then 43.4% votes powerful consumables via crafting, flask, and equivalent materials. 39% votes weaker alternatives provided by class buffs. Warrior, Season of Discovery, Onyxia / Nefarian Head buff, the warrior that can do a shout, and then he pretty much just buffs everyone with a weaker version of Onyxia's Head buff or Nefarian Head. And then lastly, 35.4% votes no/short cooldown windows. This is what they did on most private servers. They didn't have really a cooldown on the Onyxia or Nefarian's Head. So whenever one turned it in, someone else could turn it in straight after with no punishment. And I think that was a fine idea. At least that made it easier if you missed the buff the first time to just stay in the city, and maybe you'd get the buff shortly after. And as I said before, I like the idea of being able to store them, so you save the buff. But I do also think that these buffs are a little bit too strong. Just scale it down a little bit. Instead of 5% extra crit, maybe 1% extra crit, maybe 2% extra crit. And then you don't really need to have classes providing the same or weaker versions of these buffs. That's going to be a little bit redundant if they aren't as so powerful as they are right now in vanilla. And then you don't need to balance around that, because that's going to introduce other issues. Why is only the warrior being able to buff? Now he's OP and stuff like that. So making the buffs less strong so that you don't have to have the same or weaker versions on classes makes it easier in the end to balance classes. And I also think that probably the strongest buffs should come from crafting consumables used by material, not just endgame materials. Make sure that lower level materials are still needed to incentivize a world that feels alive, and people going out in the world and farming these materials, fishing, cooking, herbalism, skinning, and so on. But that's just my take. All right, guys. Thanks for sticking around for this entire Classic Plus survey analysis series. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more content on Classic Plus, Turtle WoW, and everything in between. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and stay tuned for more in-depth discussions and guides. And I'll see you in the next one.